Hello to everybody, wherever you are around the world. I'm in the UK, Paul's there in the USA, and our guest today is Keith Hampson, and he's from Australia, but he happens to be in Sweden. So as Paul said, I'm very pleased to be deputising as chair for this webinar. I wish Mark a very happy and enjoyable day at his son's wedding. This is the latest in the series of joint webinars that we've had between Purdue University and CIB, conceived by Mark as the CIB President as a joint venture. And recordings of all the previous lectures are available on our website. Just go to cibworld.org and search for the YouTube channel, and you'll find all the previous lectures, including a very excellent third series which featured prominent women researchers from around the world. In this fourth series, we feature perspectives on research from different parts of the world, and as you'll have gathered today, we're welcoming Professor Keith Hampson from Australia. Keith is the immediate past president of CIB, as you've heard. The format today is going to be a little different. It'll be more of a conversation between Keith and myself, and the opportunity is there for people who are here to come in with questions as we go along. So please post any of those questions as we go. I know, Keith, you wanted to kick off with a video, but maybe I could just ask you first of all just to share with us a little bit of your background. You know, how do you come to be where you are today in running the SBEnrc, and then we'll come on to the SBEnrc and the video in a second stage.
Wonderful. Sure. Don, thanks for that, and I appreciate the informal format, and I thought that good value can be gained by having a chat, and then I'd be delighted to take questions and make sure that there was, dare I say, crowd interaction. I think that's a very useful way to go. Look, I'm delighted to be here in Sweden, where I serve as a visiting professor for Chalmers University in Gothenburg, where I am now. And it's very interesting as I talk to some of the industry and academic leaders in this part of the world, how similar the challenges are in Australia compared to, for example, the Nordic region. But let me come to that soon. By way of history, I'm a civil engineer. I started my life in construction. I was very much looking towards a local government engineering career, water supply, sewage, roadworks, drainage. And after doing water supply, sewage, roadworks, drainage, I thought, gee, there's got to be some other aspects of engineering that I would be able to get my mind around. And I was delighted to have an opportunity to be part of a major civil engineering initiative in Queensland at the time, in building new port and harbour development at Fisherman Islands, which was transferring an upriver port facility to a downstream larger container vessel area using hydraulic dredging, new reclamation techniques, lots of planning and activities around the dredging and reclamation works, but building a new port from scratch. Roadworks, drainage, sewage, all made up those parts, of course, but on a grand scale, on a large site. And my responsibility was in the early stages looking after wharf construction, then roadworks, drainage and buildings. And it was a terrific experience for a young engineer. And through that experience, plus my earlier local government experience, I had 13 years experience in the industry, in planning, design, construction management, but also, of course, contractor and day labour supervision. So I was really fortunate that over 13 years, I had gained some good experience across a wide range of activities. And importantly, during that period, I had the opportunity and the need to consult or have universities consult on a range of challenges that we had in the workplace. And I have to say, my interface with them wasn't always in a project management context, delivered on time, on budget, and within scope. So after those years in industry, I felt it was appropriate to further my academic qualifications and moved on to do a Master of Business Administration at QUT, Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, in the land down under, hence the title of my presentation today. And in that role at QUT, I took on a part-time lecturer role in civil engineering and in construction management while I was completing my MBA. It was a great couple of years and I was encouraged to stay. And it's fair to say that I had no vision back when I started at QUT that I would be there for a quarter of a century in terms of lecturing undergraduate, building postgraduate programs, looking after overseas project management programs in various parts of Southeast Asia, and indeed going on to build a national research centre with strong links internationally. And I mentioned the Chalmers link here in Sweden. So the beginnings of the centre, Don, was really a acknowledgement in my career preparation for an academic career or an academic research career that I needed to complete a PhD. And in that process, I was extraordinarily fortunate that QUT at the time were offering international scholarships, and I was very fortunate to be offered one of very few international scholarships and succeeded in becoming enrolled and convincing the powers that be that Stanford University in California was the appropriate place to go. It was like a door opening, can I say, with a bright ray of sunshine coming in around what I would call excellent industry university relationships. I saw firsthand the relationships between Bechtel and other large construction companies, between design companies and the university, and those relationships and the free flow of students into industry and industry into university presentations was something that I hadn't seen at that scale and commitment before. And in my mind, whilst I was doing the PhD program, looking at innovation in infrastructure construction, I was also putting away ideas about how such a model could be instigated in Australia. So after the years of completing my PhD and in a focus, my PhD was looking at innovation processes in construction, particularly in highway bridge construction. I was able to examine and better understand the relationships between manufacturers of materials and equipment, the relationship between design firms, construction and asset management firms and universities, but also with clients and industry associations like the CII, the Construction Industry Institute. And all the while thinking, gee, this is a good idea. This needs to be instituted in Australia. So armed with a fresh PhD, which looked at relationships and benefits of technology and what I called technology strategy, which was really, in essence, an approach to innovation in the industry, I marched back to Australia and tapped on the door of CSIRO. Now, CSIRO is Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. For those who are in the US, you would think perhaps of NIST, the National Industry, Science and Technology Group, and a major national and well-funded research organisation. At the time, were doing some terrific work, but there wasn't very close academic or university relationships. So in 1994, 5 and 6, I was able to build those relationships between my university in Australia and the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, and we built a partnership. We called it the Construction Research Alliance. The Construction Research Alliance existed in a formal sense 1996 through to 2001. So for 5 years, we did construction research of an applied nature across the country with Queensland Government and then New South Wales Government and Victorian Government. And for those familiar with geography, you'll know that they're the eastern states, but for those not, you'll know that it's only part of Australia. So we were an East Coast research consultancy operating out of Queensland, also involving partners in universities in New South Wales and in Victoria, and in particular, RMIT. So RMIT have been our long-term research partners together with QUT since 1996. And through that period, I was very fortunate to work with leaders in research and also to build strong relationships between industry, organisations like Lend-Lease, with ARIP, and with governments of Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, but also the Australian government. And those relationships were pivotal, and it was an important progress to highlight the opportunity then to go on and feed into a national research funding mechanism called the Cooperative Research Centre Program, CRC. And in 2000, with colleagues from CSIRO and RMIT in particular, we worked to build a successful bid for a CRC for construction innovation. So in 2000, we submitted a winning bid for the CRC for construction innovation. Core partners from 28 industry, government and research organisations across the country, including QUT, led in fact by Queensland University of Technology, supported very strongly by the Queensland Government, including research partners in RMIT, University of Newcastle, Western Sydney University and University of Sydney, but including the state governments I've mentioned and major industry partners through design and construction firms. And for almost 10 years, the CRC for Construction Innovation carried out around 100 funded industry research projects and delivered those with time, cost and quality uppermost in our delivery modus operandi, and ensured that our industry partners were at all times satisfied with the relationship. When the Commonwealth Government funding, the Australian Government funding, came to a close in 2009, as was scheduled, we were absolutely determined to continue the research relationships and the networks, we call them innovation networks, to maintain the rage in terms of industry development and to focus on 3 areas of industry issues. And the 3 areas of industry issues reflect the triple bottom line approach to sustainability and environment, in people and in economical prosperity. So our research programs remain to this day structured in those 3 areas. And in that sense, today in the Sustainable Built Environment National Research Centre, which was formed in 2010 as the CRC for Construction Innovation came to a close, we structure our research program around environment. We call it Greening the Built Environment, around processes. Research program 2 is around people, processes and procurement, and productivity, the economic element. We call it people, processes, and we're ensuring that those focus areas remain as strong today as they were back in 2001 as the CRC kicked off. So we've been delighted that here we are in 2024, 15 years since we started the successor to the CRC, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment National Research Centre, let's call it SBE or SBE Australia, remains strong, is growing, remains supported by the governments of Queensland, New South Wales and Western Australia. We are headquartered at Curtin University in Perth in Western Australia and engage with the University of Queensland in Queensland, Western Sydney University in New South Wales, and still after our start back in 1996 with RMIT in the great state of Victoria. And in that sense, I want to acknowledge my initially co-host or co-presenter today, Professor Ron Wakefield, head of school at RMIT, and he's unable to join us today, for his enduring support over most of those years and the way in which we've built a collaborative research network across the country that continues strong today. So that's probably a long introduction, Don. I've covered a lot of ground, but I'm really welcoming if there was the ability to show that video, and that'll bring out some ideas around relationships and specifics around projects that I'm very happy to share with the audience today.
Okay, Keith. So we'll come on to chatting about some of the programs you've referred to there in a minute, but let's have a look at the introductory video from the SBE.
The Sustainable Built Environment National Research Centre is a unique blend of industry, government and research partners working across Australian industry with key links internationally. We structure our research along three themes: triple bottom line sustainability, environmental, social and economic. The first theme we call greening the built environment. It's about less energy, less water, lowered costs for buildings and infrastructure. The second theme, people, processes and procurement, is around valuing the investment made for social housing and looking towards building information modelling, or BIM, together with digital engineering to improve the procurement and delivery of our buildings and infrastructure. The third theme, economic, driving productivity through innovation, is about digitally integrating information across the life cycle, improving the delivery and long-term asset management of facilities like this $1 billion Perth Stadium. Our centre has a unique industry-led structure to ensure our research hits the mark at the project level, at the research committee level, and at the governing board level. Over the past decade, we've built up a robust governance structure, including industry partners, government partners, and of course the research partners on our governing board, driving practical industry-focused outcomes. And I can assure you that the board let me know if there's any concerns about getting value for money. Complementing our extensive national network, our core partners, and more than 40 project affiliates in Australia, we work with global partners, particularly through the CIB, the International Council for Research and Innovation in Building and Construction. This ensures that we have peer review at the global level, driving industry value. One approach we've found effective in communicating industry results is to carry out case studies across Australia, including the Perth Stadium. I'm delighted to say that the enduring legacy of our centre are the relationships, industry, government and researchers working together in an award-winning collaborative model that provide the facilities that are the cornerstone of our quality of life across the world.
Excellent. Don, thank you. So guys, I'm delighted to talk through a couple of projects in those areas and to then call for questions that might arise from anything that you might have heard or thought about to this point. Under the environment structured element of our research program, we're very much into sustainability of buildings, houses and infrastructure. So we're looking at process improvement in the way that we go about the building process, but also in the analysis using digital processes for looking at materials, the carbon embodied in materials, for example, in processes of construction and in the operation and maintenance of the facilities themselves. And we do this by using a supply chain approach and working with manufacturers, with builders, with asset owners, and ensuring that we get a whole of life approach to these issues rather than a spot in time, a slice in time. So in that sense, we work across, for example, public housing agencies in Queensland and in Western Australia, looking at their stock of houses. And for example, in Queensland, there are 70,000 homes across Queensland, which are deemed to be social housing, and the opportunity to lower carbon in the operating sense, but also in the introduction of new housing is being looked at in case studies as we move into 24 and 25. So that's an important underpinning of the environment theme of research. Under processes, the way in which we go about building, for example, looking at lower carbon fuels for construction equipment, be it civil construction equipment, scrapers, dozers and trucks, or vertical movement equipment like cranes. For example, we're looking at different fueling options, including hydrogen and biofuels for lower carbon construction processes. And when we look at productivity, we're certainly very keen to ensure that as we seek to achieve lower carbon construction through materials, processes, or asset management, that we do that in a way that is productive and efficient through, as I mentioned, digital engineering, artificial intelligence, and using the vast array of materials that have been developed by industry, by the government, and in not a minimal way, the case studies that we've developed over the last few decades, the ability to learn from experiences that have come before us. So I think that the important part as we go forward is to continue the work in industry government research collaboration, driven by the challenges in environmental sustainability, particularly reduction of carbon, in ensuring that we have process and people involved in those changes, and ensuring that there's an economic driver to those changes, to have the private sector partnering in the changes that are required for our project, for the state, for the nation, and can I say for the globe. So I'm thinking that that's an appropriate point to pause, Don, and welcome any questions about anything. Particularly, I'd like to talk, if there's a question that leads me in that direction, around the relationship with industry and the importance of building and maintaining those long-term, mutually supportive and respectful relationships. But over to you, Don.
Well, thanks, Keith. And what I suggest is our audience either post questions in the chat or just use the indicator to show a hand that you'd like to ask a question. In the meantime, Keith, and I'll come back to that relationship with industry later, if I may. How would you? Do you have a view on how the Australian context, the Australian industry, and if you like, research in the industry, therefore, is different in Australia compared with other parts of the world? So, for example, many of our audience are obviously from Purdue, so they may well have good experience of the industry in the USA. How would you contrast the situation in Australia with the USA?
No, it's a good question. Look, I've lived and worked in the US and the UK, and of course in Australia, but I've also travelled extensively over the past 4 decades. And it's fair to say that each project, each location is different. I mean, if I go in Australia from Brisbane to Sydney, the context is different. If I go from Melbourne to Perth, the context is different. So it's not, I should say, for each location, whether it's a national difference, like you suggest, say USA and Australia, there are significant differences. But I would say there, from my experience, that we would see as much or more differences between different states within the US. And in that sense, I'm a supporter of better understanding the context in which you're working in, regardless as to whether it has a USA address, an Australian address, or dare I say a Swedish address. There are differences across each site and across each sector of our industry, and clearly across different countries. Having said that, I'm not ducking the question. I mean, there are significant differences in my country, in Australia, with the way in which we have grown up in almost in a land of plenty with respect to the funding base for a large country with strong natural resources, and the need to connect those diverse locations with road and rail and telecommunications. And so there's a strong economy, and there is a strong construction industry that supports the nation. But as there is in the US, as there is in the UK, as there is in Europe. But I think one of the things that I note about the Australian situation versus, say, a United States situation is probably the level of union engagement of the construction workers. And clearly in different states of the US and in different employer groups, there are union states with strong union involvement across, for example, transport workers or construction workers, whereas it's probably fair to say that in Australia, that's a reasonably uniform strength of unions around the country. And through that, the construction labour costs are quite high by comparison with what we may see in some of the states of the US, for example. And that probably is consistent as well in terms of the high labour costs that we would see, say, in the Nordic region where I am now. But I think that drives things like high motivation towards automation and robotics. I mean, robotics in process improvement. So higher focus on automation and robotics, a stronger focus on probably, it's fair to say, workplace health and safety. And it's important probably in our context to note the really strong growth of health and safety work that RMIT have taken on over the past 2 decades from the early CRC for Construction Innovation days, but also around the process management. The project management processes, I think, are very strong in Australia and in the Nordic region, where labour costs are high, and the ability or the drive to actually maintain productivity because of the high labour costs and because of the high expectations in terms of quality and productivity, it really does drive a slightly different approach to the way in which plant and equipment is utilised in terms of the balance with the human labour component. So certainly I have noted that on construction sites in the US. I was walking past a construction site here in Gothenburg earlier today, the same site yesterday and the same site the day before, and I can't help but note the high quality of absolute modern, pristine equipment in concrete pumping equipment, the way in which communication is used around site, the way the equipment is utilised in a safe and efficient way, respectful of health and safety, but B, the cost of labour. So I think there's an element of that in that mix. But again, I want to highlight that different sites across the same state and the same country will also provide contrasts that are not too dissimilar to that I've just described when making a generalised comment about the US and Australia.
I mean, do you see a continuation of that trend, or Keith, does that extend as far as an interest in off-site construction, industrialised production and so on?
Yeah, no, this is on everybody's lips, of course, and in this country as well as other global markets, there's a great shortage of housing. So the Australian government has a great target, an ambitious target of 1.2 million homes to be delivered over the next 5 years, and a large part of that for social housing. So with our strong rates of immigration and our slow rates of new housing supply and the growth of smaller households, those factors in the main have pushed up the demand for housing. So prefabrication, off-site manufacture is certainly being, or interest in that is certainly being reinvigorated. This is not new, Don, as you know. This has been a topic for discussion for some decades, but it's my belief that the pressures that we have, and certainly I'm understanding some of the pressures around other countries, driving the interest and adoption of prefabrication, off-site manufacture to a much more heightened level, that it's now becoming more understood that there is a must-do rather than seeing it as an option. So the question for me in this sense relies on an understanding of the intricacies of the changes in processes that are required. In other words, let's assume that we're talking about wall units or floor units or roof trusses. Those modularized components, rather than volumetric prefabrication, for example, in lifting a house onto site on a slab, for example, I think have got much more opportunity of providing solutions for the challenges of housing in our country, for example, in Australia, than volumetric prefab in complete units, for example. But what that means is that the elements of the equipment and machinery on site and the repeatability of being able to get economies of scale in the factory in making the wall or floor or roof truss components needs to provide for a scale of production that brings economies to the table with respect to the components. But then on site, we'll need to be looking towards project management processes to bring it all together in an effective way, because if they're delivered in the wrong order, or we don't have the right craneage equipment on site, or we're building on the side of a hill in an infill site, some of those idealised efficiencies may not be realised. And the skills and equipment required in that on-site activity is sometimes different, and sometimes very different to the way that we've traditionally piece-built homes, for example, in this country. So I guess what I'm agreeing is that there is a drive towards prefabrication, off-site manufacture, industrialised manufacture, but I do believe that the supply chain evaluation of how these economies and, dare I say, the quality and safety and repeatability of those need to be also carefully considered as a package if we're to get the economies that we're dreaming about. And part of that, particularly in a social housing sense, will require the adoption of scale housing. In other words, housing that might be in modules of or program deliveries of 10 or 20 or 100 or 200, not 3 or 4 in this postcode or 4 or 5 in that postcode. We'll need to look very carefully that if we're going to realise those efficiencies, that there's a client and a customer relationship that needs to be revisited in terms of the uniqueness of the dwelling, for example, in the housing space.
Yeah, very good point, Keith. There's a question coming from Zuri Hong in the chat. So they'd like you to share more on current practice and research on automation and robotics in the industry in Australia. Zuri, do you want to add anything to your question in the chat there? Would you like to open your mic and say hello to Keith? So they go on to say, Keith, what are the pain points? How can they be addressed? What could be the trend in this direction? So a little more on current practice and research on automation and robotics.
No, terrific. I'd be delighted to. My first refereed paper was at the International Symposium for Automatics and Robotics in Construction, ISARC, in Texas in 1996. So I'm delighted to say that I've had an interest in this my entire career. In Australia, the predominant form of housing, particularly on the East Coast, where the majority of the population live, is timber construction. And so when we look at the modularisation of timber components that make up housing, for example, the roof truss industry and the wall frame industry and the floor cassette industry is moving towards robotised construction. Now, I dislike the word robots, to be honest, but automation in the assembly processes where the units of timber are pre-cut at all of the right angles and lengths, where they're assembled together and the metal clasp processes are applied, and those processes are largely automated in floors, walls and roof trusses. This area I mentioned a few moments ago is going to need to be fine-tuned if we're to meet some of the large housing expectations of the community that the government is targeting. But in other areas, if we look towards the west coast of Australia, just highlighting the differences that I was noting before about the US and Australia, the west coast of Australia, centred in Western Australia, and particularly around the southern part of Western Australia in Perth, is very much a bricks, blocks, masonry construction. And again, labour costs are driving automation and robotics in bricklaying technology, for example, machines that can lay bricks. But importantly, I mentioned before about the need to evaluate processes. Firms like one of our partners, BGC Australia, building blocks that slide together, that fit together using glue or sealant rather than mortar, and are able to be made in a lightweight material so that where there is human labour, the productivity in square metres of wall per person per hour is significantly improved. So those sorts of automation and robotics supported by different material characteristics are certainly making a big difference in the way that homes are being built. If we look towards infrastructure, for example, I mean, robotised, automated rail laying devices for rail equipment around asphalt laying and base course and top course for infrastructure. And of course, the LiDAR equipment for asphalt laying and line marking and defect notification, for example. We work with the main roads agencies around the country using or interpreting video technology or video recordings made by rapidly moving trucks and able to interpret from that the validity or the integrity of the white line that aids as the definition of the roadway for the lane detection equipment on modern vehicles. So those technologies around automatic sensing and interpretation of data to be able to, at a strategic level, provide network requirements for modern road users in the infrastructure space are also good examples of what could be broadly called automation in the industry. So certainly it's well advanced. Our universities around the country are well into artificial intelligence and machine learning, and certainly around the interpretation or the adaptation of that into labour-saving devices that aiding in housing, buildings and infrastructure construction. I might say, sorry, just to add there, there's an international component as well to this. So our partnerships with countries around the world, the US, Nordic regions and Europe, they're well advanced in providing equipment into bricks, blocks and concrete, into timber frame construction, into the automation and digitization of design, construction, scheduling and asset management. These are all very rarely national efforts. They're very much international efforts. And I think that's the way that we're going to get economies of scale and leading technological advance.
Keith, in amongst of that, and thank you. And Zuri, if you wish to follow up, please do
yes,
have a word with Keith.
Thank you for sharing. Can you provide your insights on what kind of challenges were encountered in the previous automation or robotics applications in those cases you mentioned?
So Zuri, let's just say the roof frame truss machinery, for example. Part of the answer to your question could be around the implementation elements. For example, the skilling of the workforce around the digitization of processes or the digital, machine learning I talked about a moment ago, but also the ability for us as an industry to have within our sector individuals who are literate in machine learning software and the ability to actually adapt that to specific contexts, I think is important. And so universities or places of learning, I should say, even into the trade training, already picking up the digital stream of skill development required. But I think that we're going to need more of that as we go forward. So the skill sets, the way in which our factories and labour processes work, and I mentioned in the Australian context, there's a strong union context around workers that are factory-based versus those that are site-based. And so there's some negotiations required around those elements of where the workers are covered. But also, as we move into, I mentioned before, the implementation or the integration of those elements on a site basis needs to be carefully planned and carefully integrated amongst all the other consolidated prefab site components to get the efficiencies that we dream of. So hopefully I'm very happy to talk offline about some of this, Zuri, if you feel that that's valuable to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. Probably I will reach out to you through emails if I have a chance. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. And we've about 5 to 10 minutes left in the hour today. So Keith, you talked about the research model that you have there, SBEnrc, and in particular your personal and the corporate focus on industry collaboration. Perhaps you could say a little bit more about the value of that.
Don, thank you for that. Thanks for the lead. Or following up on the lead. You know, I think at the centre of the success that our centres enjoyed over the past 2.5 decades has been the pervading long-term relationship building that we've built with every project. And you know, if you listen to some industry people who are in positions of, let's say, in yesterday's parlance, writing the checks, those that have financial responsibility, those that have been burnt by researchers saying, look, we're looking for funding for a project that's going to last the next 3 years. We need this amount of funding, and we're going to use government funding of this much to bid for a project. And then the industry people never see them again. That I hear that story, let's say, almost every week. When we build a relationship, we will often build the relationship with an industry person in a sense where they can look and see under the bonnet of what it is that we're doing without a financial commitment in the initial period. And then after that, we'll say, well, look, if you'd like to put in, you know, X dollars, usually this much, we'll let you have a case study, or we'll fund a case study for you. And if you like that, we'll do a case study this big. And then if you see value in that, we would expect you to consider being a member of the centre, which involves a more significant financial commitment. And so there's a gradual building of trust and in a sense, a building of a personal relationship. And so I'm really pleased to say that when we built the CRC for Construction Innovation, and even before that, the Construction Research Alliance with CSIRO back in the late 90s, we've still got people today working on our projects that were with us in the late 90s and into the 2000s, 2.5 decades later, because they can see value in the relationship, not just built around the project, but around being able to pick up the phone or tap out an email or send a WhatsApp message and say, who do you know in this part of the world doing this sort of work? Or do you know of a material in this space that gives me these qualities that I'm looking for? So we tend to, over time, serve as a trusted consultant for industry people who aren't looking for a sales pitch, but they're looking to deal with people who are genuinely concerned about the long-term future of industry and industry development. So in that sense, you know, it sounds hackneyed, but the trusted partner is very much the model that I think we've been able to deliver over a few decades. It's fair to say that our centre continues to grow progressively, and it's the relationships that continue those partnerships that make it work. So yes, there are many hours spent that are not, if you like, in consultant parlance, billable hours, but in the long term, they do provide the bread and butter that keeps the centre active, engaged, and influential. So it's a model of success, I think, that is really important, built on personal relationships.
And Keith, everyone at CIB is grateful that you've even gone as far as endowing personally an award at CIB, the CIB Keith Hampson ECR Industry Collaboration Award. Perhaps we should just have a quick plug for that whilst you're here.
Indeed, and for the CIB generally, Don, I wanted to finish off by saying, as I mentioned in the video that you showed at the beginning of this, it's without a doubt the CIB has been the single most important networking entity that has helped me and my colleagues in Australia connect to the rest of the world. There is no doubt about that, and it continues to do that. I'm looking forward to meeting you in Brussels next week for a CIB board meeting, and there will be new networks developed and new value adds that aren't actually realised till sometime later, next week or next year. I'll say I met a person in Buildwise in Belgium who was a colleague of our Belgium Buildwise CIB representative, and that person mentioned X or Y. Wouldn't it be good to drop them an email to follow up? In respect of the Early Career Researcher Award that I've been delighted to sponsor, I'm looking to encourage individuals who are early career researchers to really think about engagement with industry as a valuable activity that will enhance their career, but also, importantly, enhance the industry in which they're serving. And so building industry relationships where the award is able to assist with that, in building projects, in providing some funding for data collection and engagement in interviewing or measuring or building personal relationships in a broad sense is very much encouraged as part of the submission process. And I welcome, you're right, Don, any applications between now and the 14th of October, which is just 10 days' time. So yeah, look, I'm passionate about industry research relationships, and if I can in some way encourage that through this award, I'm being very pleased to do so through the CIB.
Well, thank you, Keith. And on that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we have ticked over to the hour. We've run out of time. My thanks, and I'm on your behalf, all our thanks to Professor Keith Hampson for a very interesting hour. I hope you've enjoyed the different format today. I would like to finish with one more plug for CIB, and that is that the World Building Congress will be held at Purdue University in May 2025, and I'm sure all of you there are already well aware of that, and involved many of you in work to prepare for that. So thank you for all your efforts. If you want to meet with Keith, he'll be there. I'll be there. There'll be all the major CIB players, and many of the world's leading researchers will be there in May 2025. So search on the CIB website for more information about that, and there's a WBC 2025 specific site which you can link to from that. Paul, my thanks to you for introducing the session. Thank you everybody for listening, for watching, and I wish you all a enjoyable remainder of the day wherever you may be in the world. Goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Don, and thank you, everybody.